Gonna get me on another spicy take here too, because this is a little known secret in the industry. And you being at Escape, you might know this as well. Although you guys come from a different side, so maybe it's not as important. But like Crappy, Vampy, and Vappy, every single major API vendor has code built into their runtime to be able to detect and catch those advanced attacks. They literally know how to do this. And they'll all tell you this when you're like, I want to test you against such and such, and I'm going to use Crappy. They're like, well, yeah,
Of course, it will
yes, we
work.
all know this.
Welcome to the Elephant in AppSec, the podcast to explore, challenge, and boldly face the AppSec elephants in the room. I'm Alexandra, your host, joined by my amazing co-host Tristan, a former security engineer and co-founder of Escape.
Today, we have an amazing guest, David Homoney, join us. David is the newly appointed sales engineer at Apiiro. Before stepping into this role, he made significant contributions as a technical solutions architect for application, API, and workload security at Worldwide Technology. With an impressive 30-year career in network and system administration, David has established himself as one of the strong voices in the field of API security. He is not only an API security evangelist, but also a blog contributor and speaker. Outside of his professional pursuits, David is the associate executive producer of the No Agenda Show, a popular podcast known for its insightful media deconstructions. In today's episode, we're diving deep into the world of API security. We'll get his expert insights on the latest industry buzz, including the rumored acquisition of No Name by Akamai, which was now confirmed at the RSI conference. We'll also explore the differences between runtime protection and security on the left side of the CLDLC, debate whether dust for API security testing is dead, and discuss how runtime protection API security vendors often integrate non-vulnerable apps into their algorithms instead of implementing advanced ones. Dive right in.
Hi, David. I'm very excited to have you on the podcast. It's our first podcast, actually, that's related to the API security. And you're an expert in this field. I'm super excited to have you on board. You can already see on your sweater, as we discussed before. It's actually another company that's within API security field. I know
Well, and
them.
it's actually the university side of
University,
things.
yeah.
So I'm actually presenting there. So
Oh,
they sent me the shirt, and like we were talking about before, it's cold here today. So
nice. Yeah. I think they do a lot of different courses with Cory Ball, because I read his book on
yeah, yeah.
yeah. It's quite well known, and I think there are a lot of different things happening lately in the API security field. I don't know if you've heard about recent announcements of maybe No Name Security being acquired by Akamai, right?
Right.
And what do you think about that?
So that's a very interesting turn of events. I'll tell you, I caught me completely off guard because they had just, what is it, a year and a half ago? No, a year ago, they purchased Neosec
Yeah.
and went from being, let's say, a traditional WAF, WAP API protecting company to somebody who was doing what is more traditionally seen as API security. Um, no Name's an interesting purchase in that they come about the business differently. And the way they go about detection, discovery, and all that kind of stuff is different than the way Akamai was doing it with their acquisition of Neosec. And I think they're complementary in a lot of ways. And there were strengths on both let's say the Neosec side and the No Name side, and I think they complement each other well. And they're now pretty much the only one that has a full tie-in with the code down at a full ASPM that feeds into them. So I think they're well positioned from, let's say, a runtime API security perspective. It's very interesting and a lot to flesh out. We don't know what any of the
Yeah.
details are, what that's going to turn into, but I think it's a very interesting purchase. It is a recognition of, I think, No Name being one of the leaders in the space, whether from a technology or at least a market share perspective.
Yeah, I mean, there have been already like several years in the field, and I think the overall like consolidation trend, I think that's, yeah, just continuing,
Yeah.
consolidation trend in the security. I think you also wrote like the article about, ASPM and API security
Yep.
integration, which is very interesting. So I guess like the more tools you consolidate together, the potential like the better solution you can propose to your customers.
Yeah, I mean, so our viewpoint with respect to API security and then
Mm.
going down into the code is that like ASPM is really, really hot. About a year ago, CSPM was like the hottest child on the block. Everybody wanted to
Yeah.
do CSPM. There's a DSPM around data. I want all of them to die. And I was just on a call
Okay. Why?
with an ASPM partner of ours,
Mm.
and I want you guys to die insofar as I don't want ASPM, DSPM, CSPM. I want SPM, and I think almost every CISO and every security professional, whether they're DevSecOps or whether they're more traditional security operations, they want a view of their overall security posture.
Mm.
How am I? So like there's all these vulnerabilities in code. Production code has probably thousands of found vulnerabilities by SaaS tools, right?
Yeah.
This is well known through the industry. I'm not, you know, breaking any confidences
Yeah,
here.
for
This is
sure.
well known. And what I want to know is what's my current posture at runtime? And
Mm.
then what is it in before it's runtime so that I can solve those problems and a CISO can look and say, okay, this is my overall security posture, not just my runtime security, not just these are my SaaS
Mm.
vulnerabilities, these are my it's a mess of tools, and I don't
Yeah.
think most companies even have any idea what their security posture overall is. I think runtime security they're actually pretty good on. That market
Okay.
I think is more mature, way more mature than it is on the dev side. I was sitting on a
Why do you
call
think
with
it
a
is?
Oh yeah, so this is I think a really interesting. I don't know if I have that answer, but I'll tell you what I start
Okay.
to suspect. I think that the business leaders who are the ones that are driving what development teams are doing, right? They're the new products that they want out, the new lines of business, all this kind of stuff. They don't understand, right? They just don't
Yeah.
understand. Like people understand firewalls, I think, at least at a high level. They understand those kind of things, but they don't understand code. Code is very difficult. It's messy. You
Mm.
start talking about libraries and all these dependencies and all this kind of stuff, and they don't understand. And dev teams have been given a pretty free rein. I was on this call with a customer, and my boss was on it, and we were chatting on the back end, and I'm like, I'm shocked at the lack of rigor and I know
Mm.
the customer, and on their SecOps side, it's extremely rigorous. They have a very well defined practice.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm not seeing is the same thing on the dev side. You'll get rigor within teams, but this team will use this framework. They'll use these tools. This team will
Mm.
use a competing framework and completely different tools that perform the same function as the tools on the other side. So you'll have check marks, you'll have synopsis, you'll have all
Okay.
these different tools all doing the same thing. And some minor reason as to why we did it or through acquisitions. That's always a big thing too, right? We acquire another company, they use completely different tool sets, nobody wants to change it, yada yada yada. Well, this has led to a big problem, and nobody I think has a real good grasp on what the current state of their application security is.
Okay, but do you think who's kind of responsible for that to define? Because I think it's more at the level of organizational culture, I would say, right? But
100%.
who would be responsible for that? Is it the role of CISO or
Well, that's
or
actually
CTO or?
yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And frankly, every organization treats security differently.
Mm.
Sometimes security is, hands on keyboards and they're actually
Mm.
making those configurations. Sometimes they're a policy organization and NetOps and
Mm.
DevSecOps are the ones that implement. But really, I think this is where CISOs and then
Mm.
CISOs should probably set that. That's their competency. CIOs need to back them. And I think you're going to start to see some real sea changes here. PCI DSS v4
Yeah.
which came out and started to be enforced 17 days ago, um, is a huge change for anybody who's doing anything with payments. And that's because of requirement 6, and really 6.2 section is the most performative section. And that is, hey, you have to train your developers every year on how to
Yep.
develop code securely. You have to train them also on all your security tools. So that's your scanners, all this kind of stuff. I think that's huge. The federal government in the United States recently released what they call the Secure Software Development Attestation Form. This is, if you're doing business with the federal government in the United States, your CEO now has to put his signature on a form and detailing all the frameworks and everything that they are doing to secure the code for anything being sold to the federal government. That's
Okay.
huge.
Yeah.
And that's gonna, like, initially that affects Fed, of course, but this stuff filters down throughout the rest of the industry. And so I think you're going to see a new focus on software security, software supply chain security, and API security. I think is like, they're so inextricably linked
Uh,
that you're going to see it there too.
Yeah, do you think it's actually gonna be prioritized? Because like, there's so many different applications, not only like APIs, there are just, as you said, yeah, software supply chains with the that backdoors, also vulnerability, that just came out and everyone was like
Hmm.
literally talking about
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
Do you think how would you make it, as a priority? Because it's very hard, to prioritize, because like a lot of people are talking about shift left, the advantages of
Hmm.
shift left, and as
Hmm.
you said, like a security training, yeah, for developers, but you need to train them to actually integrate, early into the life cycle. But it's hard, and it's still very hard. And how would you prioritize, API security per se, in the development process?
Sure. Well, so that's a really good, and there's a lot of nuance to your
Mm,
question there that I think we need to unpack a little bit. So API security is actually living currently in two realms.
mm,
There's runtime API security. We've hit on that
yeah.
with No Name and Akamai, and there's a plethora of other vendors,
Mm,
Salt and Traceable and
yeah.
F5 and a few others I'm sure I'm forgetting, and then people will get all mad about. But like, that's a pretty well known and defined space, and that is a space that's pretty well understood by SecOps. Um, then there's, like you alluded to, the software supply chain security and the shift left mentality. There's a
Mm.
little battle going on between me and one of my coworkers about even the
Oh,
term
I
shift
want to hear
left.
about that. What's the battle?
He hates it. He hates the term
Okay.
shift left. And I think I agree with him. To be honest
Hmm.
with you, I really do agree with him, but I don't think it's going anywhere. I think shift left is now
Hmm.
becoming like the term cloud. We all hated that 10
Hmm.
years ago. That term was stupid,
Okay.
but it hooked in, and so I think it's, at least for now, it's still performative and helps people understand on what side of the aisle we're talking on. So yeah, there is a little battle going on in that, and I
I
think
mean,
you're
for
seeing that
sure.
in the industry too. Like,
Yeah, I've seen
there's a
a
certain
lot.
fatigue. Yeah,
Yep.
there's a certain fatigue
Yeah.
with the term. But on that side, so now getting onto the code side, there's some really interesting things happening. So you see, for example, like we talked about, Apiiro's partnership with Akamai, and
Mm,
that's bringing that runtime and code together.
yeah.
F5 purchased a company called Wib that did API security, more from that like shift left. Let's find the APIs, do discovery by looking at repo, which is brilliant.
Hmm.
I think it's the only way, and
Okay.
that's probably one of my saucier things that I like to say is
Mm,
that, I don't think there's a single, and I know this is going to tick somebody off, but there's not a single runtime API security vendor that actually does discovery appropriately. Not one.
okay.
Okay. If you're running in runtime, every single one of these things connects into find and discover your APIs in some way. They are
Yeah.
connecting to either a WAF, they're
Yep.
connecting to your API gateways. The more advanced ones, and this is where there's some word games being played at times, I
Oh,
think,
for sure.
that we can discover the undiscoverable because they say, well, we can do that with EVPF. eBPF is very interesting technology. It's stupid old, but this use case for it is pretty new. It does allow you to discover unencrypted traffic because it's all before this stuff happens. But again, okay, that's great. What happens if my developer deploys where I don't have eBPF? Again, they play games. Yes, it does do better than gateways and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, I get that. Do you know every kube cluster your entire company has that's running a potential API? And are you going to get eBPF on that? Maybe, sure. Maybe in heaven you'll get that opportunity. But I have yet to see an environment that is so perfect that eBPF would solve the finding of APIs. So the only two runtimes that I know of currently, and somebody can correct us in the comments or whatever, but like the only ones I know that do this are Akamai, Neosec, and now I guess No Name eventually will have this capability too. And then also F5, and that is scanning the repos. You have a lot of ASPMs and let's say the things on that side that do and find APIs, but this is that tie-in with the runtime side. And so the runtime side, I think, is an interesting market, but they can only partially do what they claim to be able to do.
I think on my side, I try to be vendor agnostic on the podcast, I'm from Escape, API security company.
Sure.
So I'm not gonna comment it was here on other vendors.
Right.
I can leave a link to the article for the comparison afterwards for those who want to know all the comparison. But I totally agree with you. There are just so many solutions and technologies indeed listening to the traffic and then discovering it without agent installation, without at least that's what we do on our side. We do not do it at the API discovery at runtime. But there are also tooling, like DAST is, dynamic application security testing, which is at the base of Escape for the security side of things. So, and it's something that's quite often, at least I've seen, all over with also social media and where others security practitioners say DAST is that, DAST doesn't work. It was 2024 is going to be, the end of DAST. And I'm actually very curious to know your opinion there. What do you think of, DAST as the security tool? Because for me, SAST is more code checking, as you said as well. It just gives you so many, abilities afterwards than actual testing. So, when did people actually start, releasing something, releasing APIs without testing them? And what is your thoughts? What are your thoughts, there? And do you think it's maybe one of the best, or also you think it's the end of it? You absolutely hate it.
Right. In traditional applications, I think that's where you're starting to see DAST is dead. And you see a lot of DAST vendors actually rebranding themselves as IAST, and where they're pulling static testing and dynamic testing to try to come up with something more accurate, because everybody knows that SAST gives you 50 million vulnerabilities found, and you got to try to figure out which ones are important. DAST is got its own issues, and they're trying to combine the two to give you something a little bit better. I think that may kind of, sort of, I don't know. DAST ain't going away, and not anytime soon.
We're here.
Customers are still buying it. But I think on the API side, this is a different story. And I think DAST actually is much more relevant. And I think is maybe quietly needs to be considered a fourth pillar of API security. And I say this for one reason. There's a good argument to be made that without some kind of historical data, runtime API security has a very, very difficult time, if not nearly impossible time, finding some of the more difficult to detect business logic attacks, stuff that otherwise looks absolutely perfect. That's very difficult to be able to detect and notice and catch without like a lot of historical data, aka a data lake, or looking at the code. And even there can be difficult to find. And that's where I think like a fourth pillar of API security should be something like testing or pen testing of the APIs. And the reason why I think DAST or automated pen testing or however you want to put it of APIs is so much more powerful is because unlike a traditional web application, any API worth its salt or with some effort, you can create an entire swagger of that API. So now we have a defined definition of what everything this thing can do. And so now it's easier to test. I have a framework now that I can work within and know how to test. And so I'm I'm not going to be 100% definitive on this, but I would love to sit down with somebody who can explain to me in exceedingly good detail as to how you would catch, for example, a BOLA attack in runtime with no data lake or historical data to be able to find that, because it looks like a perfectly legitimate request. And if you have no back data, how are you going to tell that that's a different, like one user trying to get another user's data or something along those lines? So I think I think DAST has limitations in traditional apps. I think traditional DAST has great limitations against APIs. I think API-specific DAST and API-specific pen testing needs to be considered much more vital in API. You're seeing that. Runtime is starting to do this, right? Like,
Yeah.
The runtime, I can think of at least 3 or 4 of them that have some kind of DAST testing, but it's all brand new too. I think if you're going to get into the code side of things, that's where it really benefits you to look at somebody who does this like more specifically and attach that into your CI/CD to provide greater API security before it gets out to where runtime needs to provide protection and detection.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's one of the things that we are doing. I think I really like that you said like the business logic vulnerabilities are the ones that are the hardest, to be honest. So maybe in 1 year, we sit down together and actually we'll show you how to find BOLA at the right time. Maybe it's going to be, also possible. Because that's, I think with the advancements, of the AI and the machine learning, who knows, what like 2025, at what point in time we're going to be there. What do you think like about, AI and ML-based API security solutions? Do you believe it's actually like well-trained, or do you think it's like... Do you want to understand how it works to the point like, okay, now I believe you that it's actually, AI based?
Right. Boy, like AI and ML, those are like my boss last year at RSA, funny enough, he termed a coin Me Too-itis, right?
Okay.
And we joked about it because everywhere we walked, API security, everybody said they did it. Like I was expecting like Pelican cases, that people put sensitive stuff in, like that they don't want damage to ship, to go like we do API security too, right? Like that's what the joke was. It was everybody was now API security. I got a feeling it's all going to be app security at RSA this year, and so AI ML in tools. It's only as good as your LLM and your training of it is. I don't know. Show me where that it's going to do something that I don't already have. I don't know. I'm more interested from an AI perspective of how API security and app security is vital to AI security, and how you solve the problems of AI security using API security and AppSec, more than I say, let's say, AI being like a huge differentiator in the space. I just the only place I see AI really coming into API sec would be like, I mean, massive shift left as in intra IDE suggestions for errors found while somebody's actually coding, and then
Yeah.
having like, okay, we see you've introduced this vulnerability, and by the way, here's a suggestion of how you could remediate that. I see that as being interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
I think we discussed, the Clippy analogy.
right,
Yeah, before
right,
the podcast.
right.
So yeah.
Right. And frankly, that's where everybody it's so disheartening to be honest with you, how many people are talking about, for example, like Clippy to joke about it, but like co-pilots, right?
Mm,
This is such a terrible idea right now. And it's not
why?
that because it's going to introduce so much crappy code.
Mm,
Um, Here's the problem. Like AI can save you a incredible amount of time. I use it all the time. I pay for my own subscription to OpenAI, and I
okay.
use it to help me, for example, build out an Ansible playbook. Because I can just say, I
Mm,
need an Ansible playbook to do this. The problem is, I have yet to see it once produce an Ansible playbook that didn't have a ton of errors.
okay.
Okay. And I know it has errors, and there's subtle errors too. But I know it
Mm,
has errors because I know how to write a playbook myself. And my biggest concern is everybody's talking about these co-pilots because they want to be able to deliver code
mm,
faster and get code. The problem is that they can't deliver faster because they don't have the skill sets, and they're trying to compensate for lack of people, which it can help
mm,
because, like I said, it can make you more efficient. But you already have to have the skill sets, and way too many people, way too many conversations I'm hearing, people are using it to make up for the lack
mm,
of skill. And bad code there will be a lot of bad
mm,
code. Let's just put it that way from that. And that's because a lot of these LLMs are built upon a lot of, let's say, open source and public data. And there's a lot of errors in there. Anybody who's
yeah.
played around on Stack Exchange knows there's plenty of errors out there. And that will just get filtered in because that's where they're getting that data from.
Mm,
So yeah, I'm less pro on that stuff, and I'm much more concerned of how do I secure the AIs and protect them.
mm. And you said before, like, show me how it works. Like, how would you evaluate, the tool that, let's say, AI based, or even not AI based? Like, there's so many, IPA security companies, like you mentioned, the one like No Name, Salt,
Sure.
F5. Like, how would you say, okay, would you take, app like Vampy or Krabby or I don't know, or would you like,
Sure.
how would you evaluate their performance?
Okay, so dang, you're gonna get me on another spicy take here too, because this is a little known secret in the industry. And you being at Escape, you might know this as well. Although you guys come from a different side, so maybe it's not as important. But like Crappy, Vampy, and Vappy, every single major API vendor has code built into their runtime to be able to
Hmm,
detect and catch
hmm,
those advanced attacks. They literally know how to do this. And they'll all tell you this when you're like, I want to test you against such and I'm going to use Crappy. They're like, well, yeah,
of course it will
yes, we
work.
all know this. Right, right. So we're actually, so at WWT, I'm actually in the process of setting up a 6 vendor API security test,
Okay.
runtime API security, and we're actually gonna pen test against them and see what they actually can catch.
Hmm,
Like
that's
nobody's doing this
interesting.
now. Now I will say we are using Crappy, Vappy, and Vampy, but I'm not going to mention the one or two others that we're also going to use that I know
Hmm,
nobody uses in their tests because I want something nobody sees coming.
hmm. But I
I
think
don't
that's
want
a
that like
great benchmark,
yeah, yeah,
for
yeah.
sure.
And so like yeah, I'm super excited to see this because there's a lot of hype out there as to what everybody can or cannot do, but nobody has that I know of yet has sat down most of the major vendors, put them up against the exact same environment, and then pounded them with attacks to see what they can see, right? What will they catch? What will they won't catch? Who will catch this? Who won't catch this? And then be able to say to our customer, like, by the way, here is how they flesh out. Like the customer already has like a couple of people that they're, let's say, favoriting because of pre-existing relationships and stuff
Yeah.
like that they have, but it's like maybe this other vendor is going to be the one that actually catches stuff. So I think it's going to be huge, not only for the team I work on, so that we all know what really is going down, but I think it's going to be great for our customer, so that they can actually make a really informed decision.
Are you planning to do this evaluation only for runtime, or also like for the for the testing
Right now, it's runtime because that's the customer choice. Now, interestingly enough, so one of the things in my team, we cover app API and workload security, and the background is heavily from application delivery controllers, WAF market space. So we're runtime guys. We understand that, but like every conversation we have now with a customer, whether it's about WAF, whether it's about API security, runtime API security, every one of those conversations we talk about application security. And so as soon as we're done with this is moving directly into an application security project. We're going to do much the same. And one of the things that I want to do as part of that is say, okay, like from an API standpoint, you need to have something that's actually testing these APIs before they get into production. Runtime's great. You need to have runtime. And this is the thing I don't think a lot of people understand. And I think maybe is the genesis of my colleagues' hatred of shift left, is because it makes it sound like there's a change, like shift my focus from here over to here and ignore this, but this never goes away. That has to be there, like what we call the defend side of the plate, which is the runtime. All of that still has to stay there. It's all important. You can't like just get rid of that and do everything on the left. And it's a symbiosis between those two.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a shift everywhere,
Yeah. Or broaden your view, right? So now let's take into consideration code, because for way too long, developers have been given a completely free pass in putting out terrible code. I mean, it just the breaches are all there to prove it, right? And it's not necessarily that they did it on purpose. I mean, they're being driven to meet deadlines, and there's business goals, and there's all these things, but they are given a pass. Like no director of development of an application gets fired when his app gets owned, right? A CIO might, a CISO most certainly might.
Yeah.
But and even in a runtime space, you might, if you made a grave configuration error, but you don't see that in the dev side of the house. And I think one of the things that like PCI and the SSDAF and all this is doing, that shift left, is putting not only the focus on secure coding and making sure the software is as clean as it can be as it goes to runtime, it's shifting the onus and some of the burden and some of the responsibility over to the devs. Like, these runtime guys can't keep up with the level of development and whatnot that is going on currently. And it's wrong to try to get them to try to figure out an application after it's already released to try to protect it and do it effectively. And you're seeing the results is, there's a lot of people getting hacked and owned, whether it's APIs, traditional apps, whatever, and they can't keep up. So the shift has to happen, and it's about time they get on board.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think the shift is already happening. I think almost like every podcast episode, I talk about this relationship between developers and security people. And actually, not everyone has the same point of view, which is interesting. But I think overall, it's indeed that the relationship needs to improve, and it needs to also be improved on a more like organizational, cultural level. Mm-hmm. And for introducing, different programs like security champions, for example, in each structure. It doesn't always like have to be actually even a developer, but you can already see at least overall trend in more mature organizations that it changed. But for organizations who are not yet at this stage, it's gonna take maybe a bit some time, and indeed you need those regulations there. But once you're gonna run actually this benchmark of not on right now, I would like to also see escape results there, because right now I'm actually doing a benchmark between escape of ASAP and StackHog on different applications. We do like REST and GraphQL, and trying to see. So that would be interesting to just also compare, applications that are not APIs that are not well known, and
Mhm.
see the results. And what do you think about like GraphQL? Because GraphQL is more complicated from security testing perspective because of its graph structure.
Absolutely.
Like,
Right.
have you seen any like vendors that actually like performed very well there, or like any specific difficulties that are GraphQL, API security testing related?
Sure. I think most of the major vendors have finally caught up and now support GraphQL.
Hmm.
But there was a while there where I think there was some differentiation between the major vendors as to who supported and who didn't support GraphQL. You know,
Hmm.
again, here's the problem of focusing only at runtime, right? And not focusing down at the code level with respect to API security and
Mm-hmm.
how you're going to remediate potential problems in there.
Mm.
But no, at this point, I don't think there's a huge differentiator between the major vendors with respect to support for GraphQL and their ability to find attacks and whatnot in GraphQL, except for what I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Can they, especially without a data lake, catch things in runtime? Especially since there was a report recently I read where they rank kind of the top four vulnerabilities of APIs, and number one came to the OWA. I think it's number six, which is excessive resource consumption. Basically, oh yeah, it shows as the biggest problem in APIs is that people can suck as much out of your API as they want. But actually, it really, if you look, it's just the step below that. That was common probably amongst all the attacks, right? Like it was there. But like the real problem, what caused the data exfiltration is BOLA, BAFLA, those kind of attacks. It's those business attacks. It was 1, 2, and 3 of OWASP. Shocker
Yeah.
was number attack vectors 1, 2, and 3. Except for 6, which was, of course, just saying, okay, you also didn't have resource consumption constraints, and so they were able to suck your data way faster. That's all it really does, right? That's
Yeah.
what they're complaining about there. So really, the attack vectors on APIs are the business attacks because they're so hard to protect against, and almost no one knows they've happened until they find out their data is being sold, right?
Yeah.
And that's
Well,
when they're,
hopefully.
we got attacked. Oh
Yeah.
shit. Well, right? Like
Yeah.
that. It's too late at that point. And so yeah, I mean, it's an
Mm.
interesting space to be in. At this point, I can't imagine doing I personally believe you can't have API security without application security, right? All
Mm.
applications need to have their security, and APIs have a
Yeah.
couple of particular nuances about them that make them different than traditional apps, and so I think runtime security is important, but if you're not doing it at the code level, one, you still haven't seen all your APIs. I don't care what
Mm.
anybody tells you. And then number two, you're not
Mm-hmm.
going to be able to see some of the more, let's say, nuanced attacks.
Mm. But it like it might be also a bit hard sometimes to deploy, SPM solutions. I might be wrong, but it might be a bit hard
No,
because you
you're
need
not.
to connect it, to
Right.
everything. Because I mean, I haven't used
Right.
it, but you connect it to everything, every code repository, every cloud
Hmm.
provider. And
Hmm.
what if like an API security solution would be able to just like basically combine this connection to everything, those repositories, the gateways, the cloud
Hmm.
providers, and with like external facing, and then discover all the APIs and like security test them without actually this collaboration together.
Hmm.
Do you think it would be like a solution to the problem, or would it be good for the market overall, or interesting for the market?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's basically my goal of SPM is that broader view of everything that's going on from code to runtime. I think I think if you have only runtime API security, you're at like, let's say 70%,
Mm,
maybe 80%. Um, Again, you're not going to be able to see things in code. Now there are ways like F5, they bought Wib, and so they do a code repository scan for APIs, like as a discovery. So it's a little less impactful than having to go like a full ASPM and all that. So they're coming about it in an interesting way. They've made some great purchases and changes in the
mhm.
past 6 months that I think really took them from not somebody who I thought was a terribly serious API security vendor to somebody who's a much more serious API security vendor, because they at least are going to get that first tenant right and find all
Okay.
your APIs. And then, like from the shift left, if a customer isn't ready to consume something like an ASPM,
Mm,
there are tools out there. Escape is a great example, but there are others out there as well that are doing API security from that code level,
mm.
and then doing, let's call it DAST. You could call it pen testing. I don't care what you want to call it, but are doing the
Yeah.
testing to say, I'm not going to say that you're vulnerable for a BAFLA until I've actually done it. And then
Mm,
I prove it to you, right? Like I found, like maybe I saw it in the runtime. I'm already been attacked at that point, and hopefully I wasn't actually vulnerable to that attack, but it can warn me about it. Whereas I think some of the, look, to use that term again, the shift left
yeah.
technologies allow you to find that before it's in runtime. BAFLA and BOLAs and all these are not things that I care about in runtime or even need to necessarily be blocked if I'm not vulnerable. But if I'm vulnerable to them, then they're a real big concern. And so I'd like to know that before I put it out in production. Um, there's some runtimes that are doing API protection, which is a little
Yeah.
bit different. Now I'm going to actually try to block it.
Mm,
I'm not running into customers that want to do that yet. That's scary. I mean, they're barely doing that with their WAF, and WAF is a 20-year-old technology now, and they're only now really starting to turn those on to do blocking, because in an API world where each one of those may be a transaction that is critical to your business, if you start blocking things willy-nilly,
yeah.
that can have a massive impact on your revenue and everything else. So like they don't want to do that yet. They're not trusting of it. It's a new technology to them still, so they're not ready yet. So how do I know that if I have a BOLA or a BAFLA, how do I protect myself? Well, you fix it before it ever goes to prod. And I think that's where API security before you get to runtime makes an incredible amount of sense. I still think the runtime needs to be there. There's certain divides and certain things that you're not going to get over anytime soon, and I think those still need to be there, and they play a vital role in some cases. But I think there needs to be that left side. They can't be divorced of each other. That's the whole talk I'm talking about, is that API security will finally be the thing that forces SecOps to look left, to look at the code and say, we got to really get our hands on around this and start protecting this, because we can't keep up here anymore. We're way behind, and it's too difficult. And trying to figure out applications and APIs after they've actually been deployed is a lot harder than fixing the problem before deployed, and about 10x more expensive.
For sure.
Right?
For sure. From different perspectives, for the no, for you, for
Yeah.
yeah, for the company
Yeah.
as well, and
Frame is everything,
yeah,
right? What's the
yeah,
what's the person who's asking about this to you? What is their frame? That will tell
yeah.
you how you can focus
Mm,
your talk to them. Like, are they focused on runtime? Like, is the CISO a guy that comes from like a Cisco,
mm,
Palo Alto, Fortinet F5
yeah,
background, or is he come out of the development chains? And then there's different ways to talk to them and what they care about, and different products have different strengths.
oh
And
yeah,
so
for
right
sure.
now there's nobody I would tell you right now that I'm like, that is 100% the leader. I
Mm,
have inklings. I'll know probably here in a month. But like I
okay.
have inklings of who these people are, like on the runtime side, based upon the technology they have and what they're doing. We're about to know for sure. But like, yeah, there's certain things that I think a couple of companies are doing that make them the technology leaders, and other ones that don't have that, I think, are going to fall behind.
Mm,
And that'll be
very interesting,
interesting.
but yeah, I totally agree that approach, depending on the person, is very different.
It is. It
I
is.
mean, I think it depends on the level, I would say. On executive level, it's definitely different. On more like a manager level, I think most of the like security engineers, security managers come from the development background, so they understand the challenges. And what we see is there's always like this, not always, but it is sometimes like there is this gap between the security engineer manager and the C-level executive because of their priorities, being completely different.
Mhm.
And I'm actually curious, like, have you ever tried to hack an API?
I have. I took, or still in the process of taking Corey Ball's class on AppSec University site around hacking
Mm,
APIs. I've been doing a lot of Google donking and stuff like that,
okay.
going through the process of discovery and finding APIs and then kind of mapping them and trying to understand them a little bit better. And then I've executed attacks and stuff like that. With using stuff like Zap and Burp
Mm,
to be able to generate like bolas and baffles against known vulnerable APIs. And we actually have on WWT on our website,
mm,
our customers can sign up and once they have an account, they can actually launch labs.
mm,
And so we actually have an API security lab
mm.
where you'll go through and execute those attacks against, again, a known vulnerable API to see how runtime API security can catch it. And we're tying that in with ASPM here shortly. So the ASPM is
Okay.
actually already tied into the lab. I just
Like,
haven't had the chance to sit down and write the lab script per se, to
okay.
get the person in and show them what, the both sides of that coin. So yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of
Okay.
fun in this space.
Interesting, but like yeah, we
Yeah.
talked, as well about like AI, using AI and API security. AI. You mentioned like the AI security too, but what do you think about actually hackers using AI or maybe even LLMs, for actually
Hmm.
attacking APIs? Do you think it's going to be the more and more like aggravating problem within the
Oh yeah.
upcoming years?
It definitely lowers the bar for getting
Mm,
someone into hacking something, right?
yeah.
You don't have to be like the most intelligent coder or pen tester in the world. You can lower the bar and the attacks, especially more simple attacks.
Mm,
Um, right. Again, same thing that applies to co-pilots would apply to using an AI and an LLM for a nefarious purpose. You're still going to get a lot of crap code.
Yeah, I mean,
And so,
it doesn't work. I tried it. It doesn't work.
yeah,
It just shows you
yeah,
like
yeah,
I can't help you there. It's illegal, but
right.
no.
Well, so there are ones out there like okay, ChatGPT and Bing
Yeah,
won't do it
yeah.
for you, but I just was reading an article about one that's now out on the dark web, specifically designed for
Hmm.
hacking. This is the
Okay.
whole point of this AI is to assist people in attacking people.
Hmm.
You're going to see more of this. It's profitable. I mean, that's the one thing we know.
Yeah,
It's
for sure.
profitable. Um, and now you can't even trust them when they own you to, like in the case of Change Healthcare, they paid and they still
Hmm.
didn't get back their data. So like, yeah, I think there's going to be growing problems. Again, I think that the AI stuff, at least for now, it will get more advanced and become more capable. But for now, it'll make it easy for people who have little to no skill to be able to launch little to medium skill attacks. The really good hackers don't need the AI. They may
Oh
use it.
no,
It might speed
I don't
up
think so.
their process, right? They
Yeah.
might be able to generate something a little bit quicker. But I don't think it's going to be like the really good state-sponsored guys and the really like well-funded criminal organization. They don't need
No.
the AI. They're already good. But everybody else, yeah, I think it's going to just increase volume. It's going to be a lot more noise.
Hmm. But I mean, the noise for good for the API security, kind of evangelization, I would say, for
It
sure.
is. It'll actually be good for them too because runtime, for example, needs data.
Hmm.
They have to have a lot of traffic before they can start to actually detect issues, find all your endpoints, and then detect and catch attacks. So yeah, extra noise isn't necessarily going to be bad for runtime. It could be bad for people who haven't, let's say, developed a secure coding practice and putting out good stuff. So there may be a lot more vulnerable APIs out there that are more vulnerable to these like the low hanging fruit type of attacks. And so I think the industry is going to exploit it for what it is, right? I mean, it definitely is going to help people to sell things. And I don't necessarily think that they're wrong. I mean, there's plenty of reason to think that they need to pay close attention to this because their dev teams are not necessarily putting out the best code yet either. So,
Yeah. So I think at the end of each, podcast, I ask everyone, like, what would be your advice, for people who are just starting and say who are, on your case, like who are just starting, to work with API security, what would be like main points for them to either implement within their organization or to check, within their organization? What would you recommend them?
a great question. If somebody's just getting into API security, I would tell them, one, they need to learn APIs. You have to have at least a passing working understanding of stuff like 2023 API OWASP Top 10. Understand that. Get whatever training you can possibly get to understand APIs, how they work, and what people are doing and concerned about with them, so, understand how they're being used within your organization as much as you can and all that. After that, really getting something in is a good start. Even with, let's say, some of the spicier opinions I have on these things, I'm still going to tell you that I would rather have somebody with the worst API security tool in place than none at all. St. Augustine is famous for having said, never let the perfect be to the detriment of the good. And what he meant by that is, if you seek only perfection and you will not do anything until you've reached perfection, you'll never get there. And there's a lot of good along the way. And this is the same advice I gave customers with respect to web application firewalls. Like, get it in place and start doing something with it, because 50% security is better than zero. Right? You can have the greatest tool in the world. If it's not blocking anything, it's worthless to you. If you're not able to operationalize it. So I would tell them to get something in place, start understanding what your application footprint is. Get it attached to all your gateways. You're at least going to find shadow and zombie APIs and things that you didn't know you had. Are you perfect? No, but it's a good start. And then I would say you really need to focus on moving towards the code. That is your source of truth. Your repo is your source of truth. Is this an API? Do we have it? Are people working on it? All of that is in the code. And I think that's where everybody needs to get to with respect to it. Runtime is still important. I'm not downplaying that, but getting to the code is vital at this stage.
Yeah, totally agree with you. And do you think like actually a bit of coding practice is also useful? Because to have like, to speak with developers, you want to get into the code, you have to like kind of speak the same language, or at least very, similar language, because otherwise you can't win your case.
Oh yeah, no, 100%. That is definitely the case. I struggle with that. I come from, a network security background. I came from F5 Networks. I was there for an extremely long time. So my frame is very different than a developer's frame. And so it's definitely the hardest learning curve for me so far is being a runtime guy, trying to understand the world of the developers and the language they use and what's important and what's not important to them. Because what's important to me is not always important to them. So I think that's definitely, there's benefit to that. I think in a lot of security, let's say the security I think really, really matters. It's no longer in layers 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the OSI. it's much higher up that stack. It's in layers 5 and 6 from an like SSL
Yeah.
perspective, and it's in layer 7 for everything else, be it APIs, be it web applications, anything else is up at layer 7. And so being able to understand the upper level protocols is absolutely important. So like I tell that same person, you better understand like core HTTP.
Yep.
It's shocking how many people do API security and I couldn't tell you like the 4 main methods that HTTP uses when interacting with an API. They can't tell you that. Well, you need to know that. Like some of that is really important. So those I think are important. And then for guys like me who we have to understand the code. We have to understand what the developer's journey is, what their life day to day is, what their concerns are, the things that drive them crazy, and to try to remediate that. Like all of it should be not only security, but security that is impacts the developer in his day to day life the least. I think that's
Yeah.
like totally key, and that's just one of those things that like I've learned over this past 18 months of journey trying to learn API security and understanding like the code level of it too.
And do you have any book recommendation for our listeners as well?
Yeah. So we've kind of hinted around it a little bit. Corey Ball's book, Hacking APIs, is really, really good. I'm about a quarter of the way through it.
Yeah.
So Corey, don't hate me. But dang, like I got a lot of reading I gotta
I met
do
him
as it is.
personally once at the
Oh,
conference,
really?
like API Days conference, yeah, and he asked me
Oh,
about it. And at
fantastic.
that point, I also did not finish it entirely because there
Yeah.
is the theoretical part, is easy to understand to go through. It's more like installing Kali Linux and then doing
Yeah.
actually like the exercises, the ones that, yeah. A bit more
Yeah, and I'm
challenging.
gonna totally blank on the title because I've got it on order, but I haven't received it yet, and I'm
Oh,
looking forward to reading it. And that is a book by, and I'm gonna, Colin, forgive me, but your name is like mine, so you'll understand. He spells his name D-O Money, and I'm spelled H-O Money as it says here,
okay,
right?
yeah.
So I don't know if it's Domini or Dumani or how he pronounces his last name, but his book
Okay.
on APIs and securing APIs is something I'm really looking forward to, and I think he does it more from a shift left mentality, which is fantastic. So I'm really looking forward to reading his book. We've met each other and commiserated on the way people butcher our last names on LinkedIn, and I hope one of these days to be able to meet him in person. So
Okay,
those are the
great.
two I would definitely recommend. Yeah.
Okay, I'll definitely put the links, up below the podcast episode, and share it with people. So thanks so much for coming on the podcast and
That's my pleasure.
answering all your also spicy, like spicy, giving us your spicy answers,
Yeah.
to us. And thank you so much. And I hope we'll see each other, one time in person and talk about all things API security as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. Look forward to it.